Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of About Abroad, where it's my job to introduce you to people who have built amazing lives for themselves in various foreign corners of the globe. We're talking with expats and thought leaders about moving abroad, remote work, visas, and all the fun and practical knowledge that you need to know to follow in their footsteps. If you've ever dreamed of making a life for yourself overseas, maybe working remotely or embracing long-term travel, retiring or studying abroad, or even just taking a peek inside life beyond your borders, you've landed in the right place. My guest today is the founder of RePeople. His name is Nacho Rodriguez, and he's based in the Canary Islands, which is a beautiful archipelago down off the coast of Africa, a part of Spain, and something we'll dive deep into today during this interview. Nacho's been a friend and counterpart, I guess you'd say, at another organization for the last couple years, and I was super excited to get him on the show because he's a wealth of knowledge on all things related to the Canary Islands, co-living, remote work, a bunch of stuff that this program is all about, and I was excited to have him join and share some of his knowledge with us. So his energy for the Canary Islands is very contagious, and the story behind how he kind of returned home to make the Canary Islands a hub for digital nomads and people moving around the world and settling down and creating sort of a community where people can live long-term, working remotely and otherwise, is just really, really fun to listen to. So I think you'll enjoy this one, and I hope you will help me in welcoming Nacho to About Abroad. Nacho Rodriguez, bienvenidos a About Abroad. How are you, my friend?
Doing very good. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. So good to see you. It's been way too long. Super excited about having you on the show. When I started this show, actually, you were one of the first people that came to my mind that I said, I've got to get you on here eventually, but you're a very busy guy, so I appreciate you making the time.
I'm excited about this.
Great. Where are you now? Are you in Gran Canaria?
I'm in Gran Canaria in my home office in Las Palmas city in particular. So yeah, I worked quite a bit from my home office, even though I run co-working spaces. But I've gotten used to work from my home office and love it here.
Yeah, everybody has to pick their own space. Well, speaking of the co-living space, let's dive right into it. So you are the founder of RePeople, which is a lot of different things, one of which is co-living, which I want to spend a good bit of time on today. But maybe give everybody a little bit of background real quick on what RePeople is and some of the things that you do, and then sort of segue right into the co-living aspect.
Awesome. Well, actually, for people to understand why we are a lot of things, I'm going to try to summarize the last 6 years in a minute or a bit more. This adventure started 6 years ago, us opening a co-working space, which actually was more of a shared office. We had an empty office space that we needed for a particular project, and it was too large for this project, and decided to open it up to other people to use it. Particularly, we were thinking back in the day about some of the freelancers that we were collaborating with on this particular project, local freelancers, and that's when we encountered this movement, right? The digital nomad movement back then, which was already a thing in Las Palmas 6 years ago. It was there were already a lot of people coming and working remotely from Gran Canaria for a part of their winter, and they started knocking the door in our co-working space, and for me that was really enlightening. I didn't know back then that this movement existed, that people could work remotely from any locations around the world, and I decided to really dive deep into this topic and understand it better, understand what was happening and why. Because for me, it was the part that I was missing in my own hometown. And after living in cities like Boston that are super international, a lot of young people doing very interesting stuff. When I decided to come back to my hometown, which is a place I love, I was missing a little bit of that interaction. I had all my buddies, but I was missing that interaction with people from all over the world working on interesting stuff. And they started knocking in my door. So I was like, well, we have to figure out a way to accelerate this. If it's already happened naturally, we have to really understand it and try to position ourselves better so that we can attract more people that we can hang out with. That was the basics of where everything started. And that dive us into a lot of different projects that started evolving over time in a very organic and natural way. And so, first of all, we started a conference. And the reason why we started a conference was because we needed to generate content about our own destination. The Gran Canaria and the Canary Islands in particular have been very successful tourism destinations for the last 40 years. And the problem with that success is that it played against us in terms of showcasing what the experience was like to live here, not to live on a hotel on a resort for a week, but to actually live here and experience the Canary Islands as we as locals do. So the motivation to start a conference back then was to actually bring people, have them experience what we experience on a daily basis here in terms of activities and things to do and the lifestyle that we as islanders enjoy, and then showcase it. So that's where Nomad City Conference started almost 5 years ago as an excuse to generate content to try to not change but amplify the perception of the destination. And connecting to your question, which was more focused on Coliving, the Coliving just started as a demand from our coworkers. A lot of the people we hosted had issues with flexible accommodation. They had Airbnbs for 1 week or two, or maybe a month in the best case, but in a very expensive. And then they had the long-term contracts, which in Spain for an expat, it's very complicated because they would ask all kinds of background information, and it's just a process that nobody wants to deal with. And in the middle, there was nothing. If you wanted to stay maybe a month or maybe six, you didn't have a solution. And we decided to test if a co-living concept will work, both to solve the flexible part of the accommodation. So we're very flexible and only focusing the co-livings on remote workers, but also to provide that community aspect. So if you land as an individual in a new city where you don't know anyone, living with other people that are in the same situation as you are helps to make you feel like you're home, because right when you land, you have a place to work, you have people to hang out with. So it's much easier to really enjoy and discover and meet other people. And that's how the co-livings started almost 4 years ago. First as a beta test. Then when we understood the dynamics and how the experience was, we started scaling the offer as we received more and more demand. So currently we're operating 4 permanent co-livings and also hosting temporary co-livings in different locations.
So tell me about the temporary co-livings. Well, actually, hold on. First of all, let's back up. So clarify for anybody that's just like totally new to this concept of co-living, because I've actually mentioned co-living to somebody and had them say, "You mean co-working, right?" And I'm like, "No, co-living, like where you actually live in the same place." They're like, "No, you mean co-working. It's where you work in the same place." Like we must have misunderstood each other. So it's a super new concept relatively to even some other sort of newer concepts like co-working. So let's set the stage for somebody that really doesn't understand co-living. I'll let you do it, but basically, I mean, we're talking about a place where you go and you work and you live together, and if you can expound upon that for us.
Yes, well, I must say that there are different types of co-livings. So in our case, we are offering shared accommodations. So basically, there are large houses with a lot of rooms. Some of them have up to 7 double bedrooms that share a common space, share a kitchen, share a living room, might share a terrace or a garden, but individuals or couples. So we don't mix people inside the room. So you have to be either individuals or couples that travel together, have their own space. Normally, even inside the room, there's also workspace, and then share common areas. So they share the kitchen, they share the living room, etc. And in our case, our kinds of living are very focused on hosting remote workers. So we don't host tourists or visitors and also remote workers. So it's mainly focused on remote workers. And what that facilitates, it's basically having a community to connect with right away of like-minded people, individuals that are have some similar interests that might be also, like you in terms of traveling, moving around the world, and that you can hang out with and meet and do stuff together whenever you want, or you can do your own thing. But if you go to a co-living, normally you were looking for that interaction with all the people, because there's always an alternative to rent out in Airbnb for yourself. But in this case, the community factor is very important. And actually, it's a natural filter. People who join our co-livings are somehow like-minded, are looking for that interaction with others. So normally, there's a really good vibe inside the houses.
Yeah, if you follow along on any of the social media for RePeople or even your personal social media, like you can see very quickly, like there's a great vibe with the people that come there. They're like you're immediately kind of surrounded by people of similar mindset, and you have a great place to work, strong Wi-Fi, dedicated space, awesome setting in a beautiful location. It really can't be beat on the surface. And you mentioned singles and couples. What about families? Is there any sort of you know tendency to cater towards families in some sort of dedicated way? I think it's a growing trend. We're seeing more and more of this as you get people who have couples who now have the ability to both work from wherever. They're saying, "Hey, how do I bring the kids along on this adventure?" Are you doing anything to cater to that crowd?
Well, that's exactly a project that we're currently working on. As families have different needs. For families that travel with kids, the logistics are totally different. So we need to think about the need of space to start with. They normally need more space. Sometimes the interaction. So a family cannot normally, it wouldn't work to interact within a co-living or with individuals because there's kids involved. It gets really, really complicated. So then they need normally dedicated space. And they have also other issues like schooling for kids or activities for kids. So we are currently working on that. We're currently working on a real estate project that caters families, where the idea is to provide families with larger spaces, 2 or 3 bedrooms, so that they have their own space, but also where we can offer community space for families, where we can have maybe a co-working space for the parents that might be out, alternating taking care of the kids with working, but also a place where kids can play, and we can offer services for childcare while they're enjoying, but also a social space where the families can meet and have a barbecue together and enjoy their stay. Obviously, cater to families normally travel slowly, right? They don't travel as fast. So normally for midterm, 6 up to a year or even longer, right? So that it's sometimes connected to the school year. Right now, I think that there's a lot of families looking into traveling and starting to be more location independent, but the market has not offered really solutions for them, and that's what the area that we're currently working on, because we understand that there's going to be a huge transition with the global adoption of remote work. There's a lot of parents who both have the flexibility to work remotely, but they are not taking that step. They're still living in that big hub because they don't know where to go, where they can really solve all their solutions easily. And that's what an area that we're currently working on.
I had a feeling you might be kind of on the cutting edge of that, because I agree. I mean, I can attest to it from hosting this podcast and the work that I do. Outside of this podcast, I'm talking to people every day who traditionally this has kind of been the thing that's held people back. The mid 30 somethings or 40 somethings that have in the past been travelers. They feel like they've sort of had to pick between traveling with kids now or just staying put and doing quote unquote what's best for the kid and kind of settling down. And people are starting to test the waters with how do I push the boundaries on that. So it's really cool. I've recently heard about like a nomad school kind of thing that's getting set up in like particular nomad hubs. I don't know if that's been set up yet in the Grand Canaries or not, but basically it's like where you could move around. It sounds like, and like your kid could easily transition from one hub to the next as you sort of nomad around.
Well, the interesting thing about this transition that COVID has accelerated, it's that also education has been transformed. It's living through a huge transformation that I personally think that it should have happened a long time ago, but it was just really trying to hold to what's been the old way of doing things. One of the very interesting projects that we hosted at one of our Colivings, because we do also host retreats and specific events during specific times of the year. It's called Edumatic. Edumatic is a project that joins education and the nomadic movement. And it was before the pandemic, focused on hosting students, university students that were studying already online, or they were doing alternative studies, not necessarily university, but already on that scope of age, that were making groups of students that were studying online and helping them travel together around the world. And we
Wow.
hosted them here in Las Palmas for a whole month. They were doing a 3-month long trip, and one of the stops was Gran Canaria. And that totally blew my mind. I was like, where do I have to sign up my 7-year-old so that when he's 18, he can do this? Because it's like the best of both education. So it's like traveling, which is an education and a degree by itself, and getting an online education more connected to the market, etc. And I was like, well, that's where things are heading. And with the pandemic, we've seen my 6-year-old, well, my 7-year-old now, but 6-year-old when they started having Zoom classes with their school. I mean, a year and a half ago, that nobody would have thought that this was possible, and it was, and it somehow worked, and without preparedness and without planning. So we're definitely going to see a lot more flexibility around the schooling, both for kids and also for older students, and that's also going to allow a lot of families to relocate and move temporarily. Let's think about holidays, right? So holidays around, like, the concept of holidays were always like limited by work. So you went on holidays when you had time off at work, and you could travel somewhere for a week and then come back because you had to be at work and you had to keep working. Or maybe you had holidays but you couldn't travel because your kids were in school. And now those two factors are totally blown. So you can travel and relocate. Hey, why don't we relocate for 2 or 3 months during the summer while our kids have holidays somewhere else where we can work remotely? I mean, that whole concept of holidays, it's totally transformed. And there's going to be also a transformation in the hospitality sector, catering services for families that now have a lot more flexibility.
Totally agree. It's so awesome for you, I think, to be at the intersection of these things, right? Because they are all changing very rapidly, and you've always been in this remote work sort of advocacy role, and to see it from a commercial standpoint, really connecting, and you being at the center of that there in Gran Canaria is very, very cool to watch from the outside. I imagine it's pretty exciting to be a part of, for you as well.
To be honest, it's a roller coaster. Like
Yeah.
right now, like there's so many things happening so fast that even us, that we were already advocating for this, and that had this perception, and that we knew that it was going to happen sooner or later. Uh, I sometimes have to like stop and try to really look around and try to understand what's happening because there's so many things happening at once, and so fast that it's sometimes mind blowing, but it's super exciting.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. You were talking about your 7-year-old doing Zoom calls. I got schooled the other day by like a 9-year-old on synchronous versus asynchronous communication, because she's doing some of her work synchronously and some of her schoolwork asynchronously. And this was over a Zoom call with a kind of counterpart at another company, and his daughter was sitting there, and she started schooling me on this difference between synchronous and asynchronous communication. I thought, man, this has really accelerated things really fast. So
That's
yeah,
totally. I think that we're gonna learn a lot from the younger generations. The other day, I was discussing with someone. Right, we always talk about presential, right? How important for our generation presential is, because we still, need that human interaction between each other. And this was a debate around actually our event. We are really looking forward to host the event in person again, because we've seen the outcome of the relationships that were built during the event that we have not been able to replicate online. We managed to replicate the energy, but we didn't manage to replicate the relationship building. Because at the end, if you go hiking with someone, you're going to have a connection that Zoom, it's never going to probably make, right? But then that made us reflect on the relationships that the younger generations have today, where they meet their friends online playing Minecraft. And that for me is mind-blowing, because I was never exposed to that kind of relationship building, but our kids are in some way. So for them, it might be totally fine to just meet online and really build relationships totally virtual, which for us, there's still sort of like, a big distance. So definitely we need to pay attention to the younger guys or the younger generations to learn from them, because we have a lot of things assumed because the way we grew up that they don't have, and that they're going to lead the way.
I think about this a lot, Nacho, because I wonder, like, on one hand, okay, so on one hand, I totally agree with you. We're in a similar age range where, like, let's just say we didn't grow up with Facebook. All right, so there's that group that grew up with Facebook as a normal thing, and I didn't, and you didn't, and so we do crave that human interaction. We're social beings. We and we're advocates. We're both advocates for remote work. So we obviously also push for remote work, but there's that balance where you're talking about the conference. We want that human interaction. We want to be together in the same place. We want to give each other a hug and shake hands and all that stuff. And then there are that other group that and like your 7-year-old who will grow up making friends, playing Minecraft and learning how to make friends virtually, and they have a big advantage over you and I in that will be very normal for them, and it would be a shame to prevent them or to stunt that growth that they could have, because that is the future. And then on the other hand, as the pre-Facebook generation, we also want to say, hey, but human interaction's still important too. There's a place for it. And if they challenge me and say, why? I can do it all online. I can do it faster. Don't you talk about that in the workplace every day? And I don't have a good answer for that. So I don't know. Like, you're a dad, you have kids, and you're also at this intersection of these things. I wonder if you think about this and what your thoughts are, and I don't know if you can elaborate on it anymore.
Well, the thing is that we need to challenge the status quo at all times, and particularly in these times where things are going to be evolving so fast. Like, those assumptions that worked for centuries now they will be challenged at all times. So right now, I think that we need to be super flexible, and we need to reflect on our own assumptions and values, and understand that things are going to evolve, and that we need to be flexible, or at least try to understand that the things might not be the way we think they should be, and that's probably the best way to approach it, because there's going to be certainly different realities. I think that for all the generations, they're going to have their own vision of the world and their own truth and their own values, and from there until the younger ones, there's going to be a whole gap and a whole range of ways of interacting, of seeing the world, of understanding the world, that it's going to be quite different.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's interesting. Changing times, changing more rapidly every single day. We'll be right back to the show after a quick break for a note from our sponsor. This season is brought to you by my good friends over at Insured Nomads. They're the absolute best in the business when it comes to providing health, travel, and medical insurance for nomads, expats, and really just all forms of world travelers. I know insurance is often something that's overlooked when we're fantasizing about traveling the world, but it's absolutely necessity that we address this, because often the policy you have in your home country isn't going to cover you while you're abroad. And it's also a requirement, as a lot of people may not realize, to actually buy private travel or expat insurance, as it's called sometimes, to obtain a visa or even enter certain countries. So fortunately, there are companies like Insured Nomads to help us with this. Not only do they have excellent coverage and great prices, but they're also providing a first-class experience with additional perks and best-in-class technology via their app. It's an amazing experience. I can't recommend it enough. Now, this is a company that was built by world travelers for world travelers. So They know what it's like to find yourself in a difficult medical situation abroad, and they want to keep you from having that same bad experience. So the next time you're planning a trip abroad, whether it's for a week or a lifetime, check out Insured Nomads via the link in the show notes. Okay, now back to the episode. Coming back to the conference real quick, we kind of didn't close that loop. Can you tell the audience a little bit about the upcoming event that you have? You know, we're all aware things change rapidly these days with COVID and such, but the plan now, what you know, kind of where the event itself has been in the past and what you forecast for 2021.
Well, just to summarize also the story of the event. So, as I mentioned earlier, the event started as an excuse almost 5 years ago to generate content and portray the destination for remote workers. More focused back then because that's where the critic mass was around the remote work movement. It was the digital nomad movement, which were more individuals, freelancers who back then had the flexibility because in the corporate world, 5 years ago, there were very small, very few companies who were adopting distributed work by default. So the event itself has been growing and learning and changing. Up to last year, we decided to rebrand Nomad City into RePeople because we were already targeting a much larger topic. So we started as a digital nomad conference back then in Nomad City, and we evolved into the umbrella of remote work, which actually it's much broader. So digital nomadism in our perspective is part of the remote work movement. And when we talk about remote work, we have to talk about companies, distributed work, we have to talk about tools, but we also have to talk about socioeconomic impact. What does remote work mean for rural economies? What are the opportunities? What are regions doing to attract talent that now can relocate anywhere? Particularly after this year, what's going to happen with the big hubs? Are they going to become distributed hubs? Who's going to benefit from that? So the scope of the topics that we are interested in, let's say what we were discussing before, tourism industry, real estate, hospitality, how's that going to be transformed with this movement and with the fact that we have inherited a way of doing things in the Industrial Revolution, and now things are going back to a more distributed way. So it changes the whole society. So now RePeople, that's why we are connected also with the brand. RePeople means to repopulate. We think that that the distributed work is going to repopulate a lot of areas and solve a lot of problems that areas suffered in the past. The Canary Islands have suffered a lot of brain drain over the last 3 decades. We really think that this movement can recuperate part of that talent and bring it back to the island. So the conference has evolved into a much larger scope of topics. Last year, unfortunately, we were forced to do it exclusively online. As I mentioned before, one of the feedbacks that we receive over and over again from every year, and particularly from the advocates group, so though the group of people that attended the conference to participate actively and to share their knowledge and their experience, is that they really built amazing relationships that were really useful after the event. So we've been keen on recuperating the presential in other means, because one of the missions of the event is also to attract people to the Canary Islands, because we were connected to that mission. So we're planning for October 28th to recuperate the presential. Mainly here in Gran Canaria. But as we were planning the event and understanding how this crisis and this pandemic was evolving, we realized that we had to go hybrid. So we understood that people might not feel comfortable attending in person, and we respected that. And we said, okay, well, we're going to do a hybrid too, so that people can connect from anywhere in the world if they don't want to travel, if they want to hang out around other people. But then we realized, well, there's travel restrictions. So why don't we do it also co-located? Back then, for example, US citizens couldn't travel to Europe. We're like, well, if they cannot travel to Europe, we're going to have to go to the US. So we decided to already work on 2 co-locations, both in the West Coast and the East Coast, in Boston and in San Francisco, and also working on a couple more co-locations in Europe, so that we at the end distribute the event. So we are really making a distributed conference so that people can attend wherever it's closer, more convenient for them. But also this allows us to also reduce the capacity of the event, so there we can have things more under control and also stay under the limitations of each city. But also we want to bring a global experience. So we're going to connect in a synchronous part the locations. We're going to jump from one location to the other so that even people that are attending in person in any of the locations can feel that they are part of a larger event and a larger community.
To summarize that, you'll have physical, presential locations where people can meet up in person in real life, not over a screen, in San Francisco, Boston, Gran Canaria, and then probably a couple other places that by the time this airs will be firmed up in Europe. And also it will all be online, so people can be attending virtually from anywhere. And then you'll sync those locations up for a period of time so that it feels like you're all together from San Francisco to across Europe.
Correct. Basically, what we're going to sync, it's a 2-hour agenda. The event, each location is obviously going to have a much longer agenda and specific to each location and to the community that is going to attend each location. But basically what we're going to do is during that 2-hour span, we're going to sync all locations. We're going to jump from one location to the other. If we're going to start with a keynote in Gran Canaria, that's going to be live streamed to both online, but also to the other locations. And we're going to do a loop around the different locations so that we have at least a keynote in each location and people can feel part of this as a global event. It's an experiment, but that's what we have in mind and that's what we're putting together.
As a fellow pre-Facebooker, we have to be pretty impressed with how far we've come with the fact that can be done, right? Like it sounds like a challenge, but it doesn't sound too far fetched. Like, oh yeah, we can surely sync up multiple conferences across the globe, throw parties around the world together and get everybody together and build a community. That's amazing.
Exactly, we're leading the way.
It's could be a very good model for others. I mean, online events, are a big growing space. There's companies like Hopin, which just reached 500. What was the value? They reached like 500 billion.
I lost track of it already.
Some crazy astronomical number. It's a fully remote team building remote conference software, and it's crazy. This is a growing space, and that's a very cool concept because it has been again about like a decision between do we meet in person or do we do it virtually, and the virtual thing you do miss something about that, at least for us pre-Facebookers. We miss that getting together, and then there's the virtual aspect actually I think is a lot more efficient from a digesting the content. It's a lot easier, as a viewer I can pick and choose what I want to listen to and what I don't, and
Correct.
I can tune into the networking thing when I want to, and I can check out when I need to recharge the batteries and don't have to fly there. And so there's a lot of trade-offs. Ultimately, I'm always lean towards the meeting in person thing because I think especially, a lot of remote workers, we're working pretty isolated a lot of times. So when we get that 1, 2, 3 times a year opportunity to get together, that energy is very contagious and can definitely help recharge.
Well, I must say that also the nature of our conference, it's probably totally different from a traditional conference. All the events that we hosted in person, the content was sort of like centered around 1 or 2 days. But we encourage all attendees and all participants to visit us at least for a week. And we had a whole week of planning, of activities, of meetups, afterworks, etc. So by the time that people actually arrived to the conference, there was a crazy energy. Like it was really high level of energy because people had met each other, had time to really interact, to hang out together, to do some activities that a lot of them had in common together. So there's no better way to network than going on a hike together. It's crazy, but the relationships and the deepness connection of people going on a hike, if they both obviously like hiking, it doesn't. There's no comparison to that, and we've realized the outcome of that is that great relationships are being built and new projects have been started because of the event that we put together, and obviously we like to continue that path.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a nice little segue because you mentioned hiking. And if you're unfamiliar with the Canary Islands, you may be thinking of like flat, tropical, like Caribbean island beaches, or something like this. But I just recently, I think you know this, Nacho. I just made my first trip to the Canaries this year. Spent a month working from there. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we couldn't line up a face-to-face meetup and do this in person. But I was blown away. I knew a little bit about the Canary Islands. I thought I did. I was blown away by the landscapes and the variety that you get in terms of like mountains and volcano. Like on Tenerife, you can be standing on a black sand beach, looking straight up at a snow-capped, the highest mountain in all of Spain, and snow-capped volcano, and which is the highest peak in all of Spain. And when you go to some of these other islands, I was in La Palma, and just like you're deep in a jungle next to a waterfall, deep in the mountains, and then 10 minutes later you're standing on the beach like with like crazy big waves. And so I think what if people are unfamiliar with the Canary Islands, something I would love to get them to understand, listening to the last part of this episode, is a taste for what life in the Canary Islands is like. Because you left, like you said, you left vibrant cities where you could have continued your education, your career in big cities, hubs around the world. You've lived in quite a few places, which it would be great to dive into if we get a chance to. But you came back to the Canaries for a reason. And when I visited it, I understood completely why. There's a rich vibrancy, a culture, great food, a growing digital nomad scene there with lots of internationals, obviously beautiful landscape. So, tell us a little bit about the Canary Islands, what drew you back, what you love about it, and just help people get a sense of what's so great about the Canary Islands.
Well, I was born and raised here until I was 18. I did travel a bit when I was younger to Germany because I went to a German high school, and I was exposed, to other locations when I was younger. And when I was 18, I managed to get scholarships in the US, and went there for school, and then traveled around all over the US, then came back to Europe, lived in Germany for a while, traveled around Europe, and to a point where I was like, well, I kind of like it back home. But it was important for me to really get that exposure, because unfortunately, I think a lot of the Canary Islands who don't have the possibility to travel as I did, sometimes they give things for granted. And I did it. I managed to really, have a vision of alternatives around the world and other places to live, and compare quality of living here and there. And I was like, well, I want to go back home, and I want to live there, and I want to work there, and I want to generate, if I can, impact locally. So and as you mentioned, sometimes even limiting my professional capacity too, because back then remote work wasn't a thing when I decided to come back. And I could have stayed and worked for large corporations in Boston or in Berlin or whatever, probably making more money and having more like professional career. But I was like, no, I mean, I want to go back home. And for 10, 15 years, I worked in the renewable energy sector here in the Canary Islands, also driving a good amount of positive impact to our region. And then I discovered remote work, and I was like, wow, that's the perfect. So I can work remotely from here. I can meet people from all over the world. My hometown, this is like, it can't get any better than this. And the reason, and what you brought up, which I think it's very important. I think that's one of the reasons that makes us a spatial location around the globe for people who are location independent, is actually the diversity that you can find in 8 small islands in the middle of the Atlantic. Because I don't think you had a chance to go to Fuerteventura yet, but that's just sandy beaches, desert looking like Caribbean style beaches where you can all kite surf and windsurf and scuba dive all day long. And then you have the other spectrum, which is La Palma, which is 80% of the island. It's a national park, and you can go hiking. It's pure nature, wild, untouched beauty. And in the middle, you have a lot of things. So, and in fact, when we promote the destination, we promote the destination as a whole, because we know there's going to be people who love to kite and just be sandy and all day long in Fuerteventura. We know that there's people who connect more with the hiking and the nature in La Palma, or that they love the urban, more style of living with the beach by the city in Las Palmas, and they prefer that combination. And so there's like a part of the world for everyone. In fact, Gran Canaria, we call it the miniature continent, because in a very small space you have a huge diversity of landscapes within like a 30-minute drive. And that's what makes this archipelago different. And that's what we're trying to project, trying to advocate for, to really drive talent, to also recuperate talent, which is something I mentioned before. With this global adoption of remote work, we were really excited to see a lot of Canary Islanders that had to leave the archipelago because they couldn't find those jobs that they deserved here locally, to come back and keep, doing their professional careers remotely from the Canary Islands. I think that's going to drive a huge impact in our region. So yeah, we love it here, and we will welcome all you to come visit and experience it for yourselves.
I can attest. Yes, give it a try. It's a beautiful part of the world. I was curious, actually, like it's so far from mainland Spain relative to the rest of Europe, and I mean, things are relatively close in Europe. A fellow American might say, "Oh, it's only a 3-hour flight. That's nothing." But when I talk to people in Valencia who think that a 2-hour drive up the road or 3-hour drive up the road to Barcelona is far, then they think Canary Islands are really far away. How do Canary Islanders look at the mainland of Spain? Is there a tight connection, or does it feel very distant, not geographically, but what's the connection with Spain in your mind, like the mainland?
I think the Canary Islands as a whole, we first have a very strong identity in terms of we probably would say that we are Canary Islanders first. At least I do it, and then I'm Spaniard, but I'm Canary Island goes first. But I think we are very connected to Spain and to the Spanish culture as a whole, with our differences. We have a different accent, more closer to the Latin America. We are often confused with Venezuelan or people from Chile, because I mean, for example, my grandfather emigrated to Cuba and to Venezuela when he was young, and then he decided to come back. So there is a very strong connection between the Canary Islands and Latin America, but there's also a very strong connection to Spain. And geographically, interestingly enough, the fact that we're in the middle of the Atlantic, somewhere lost there off the coast from Africa, also has some very interesting facts. I mean, we're like 3 to 4 hour flight to Brazil. We will be a 5-hour flight to Miami. And we are still 2-hour flight to Madrid. So we are in a geographically very interesting point in the world. So obviously that also has some benefits, like having one of the world's best climates, which also is connected to our location. So there's a lot of good things about being where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there direct flights to some of those places that you mentioned, aside from, or do you connect back through Madrid?
Right now, we're very well connected to everywhere in Europe and everywhere in Africa. There's a lot of direct flights. Right now, the local airline, which is actually growing quite a bit. It's starting to offer in flights to the US. Right now, as far as I know, there's no direct connections to Latin America. But as there's influx of people moving, it would make a lot of sense for an airline to set up a flight, just because it's so much shorter than actually having to fly to Madrid and then go back to the mainland. So it's a matter of having enough people moving, so that will be a reality.
Wow. That's I hadn't actually really thought about that, because I was just flying back and forth between here and Spain. That's a very strong feature, because I mean, if you're close to getting back home, wherever home is always a concern for people that are considering moving abroad for the first time. What if I have to get back in sort of an emergency?
Yep.
Are there direct flights? In a lot of islandy areas, you often have to connect back. You're 3-4 flights away, and it takes a day. That's really interesting. That's great.
Well, one of the benefits of being a massive tourism destination, the Canary Islands, we need to think that before the pandemic managed to receive up to 15 million visitors. That's a lot of people, and that's a lot of flights to everywhere in the world. So as that type of tourism gets activated again, I mean, we used to be able to fly pretty much everywhere and super cheap. So connectivity hasn't been an issue in the past, even though we are located where we are. Another interesting factor of the Canary Islands is that we are a telecommunication hub. And that's why I have a 1 gigabyte connection, symmetrical connection at home as a standard here in Las Palmas, because we are a hub of all the fiber optic cable that connects all the west coast of Africa. And obviously, connectivity for remote workers is it's super important, and
Yeah.
that's something that companies can have here as a standard. Much higher connectivity rates for companies that needs specific services. So it's also a really good reason to relocate here, both as an individual, but also as a company.
Yeah, yeah, it is. That's a huge factor. A lot of people's first question is, "How's the Wi-Fi?" And especially with remote workers and knowledge workers, that's great to know. Yeah, it really does check all the boxes, and I think there's like the handful of places in the world that are becoming. Yeah, I almost hate to use the word digital nomad now because it sort of like implies this very nomadic person, whereas like you and I have lived in other countries, and a lot of people I bring on this show are people who are like, no, I moved to this country, I work remotely from there, but I live there. But it's one of those handful of places in the world that's like really on the rise, really becoming a hub for people to say, I want to go live a good quality of life. I want it to be affordable, great weather, good food, international environment, good place to raise kids. I know a lot of people are moving there to the Canary Islands to raise families, go put their kids in schools and actually settle down and create roots. And then as you said, you're connected to Africa, the Americas, all of Europe, of course. There's a lot of selling points. It's not a hard product to sell, actually. It sounds like.
Exactly, but I think it's very important as you realize yourself. Again, one of the reasons why we've done the conference is we want to drive people here so that they can experience it by themselves. If you've never been, I can talk to you about the Canary Islands for hours, but until you don't experience it yourself and you realize and you connect yourself with the beauty and the value proposition of the archipelago, then it's just words, right?
Yeah.
So that's why we encourage everyone to visit and experience it for themselves.
Absolutely. Stamped and approved by Chase here on the other end of the microphone. I totally agree. The last little thing I would love to touch on real quick before I let you go, Nacho, is something you've touched on a lot throughout this conversation, but we haven't really addressed directly. And it relates back to, I think, pretty much everything that you're doing, which is the socioeconomic impact that remote work can have and is having on the Canary Islands. You're directly involved in this, and I think it's something you're passionate about. I am as well. I've said before on here, like when I first got into remote work and digital nomading, and this, it was for selfish reasons. I wanted to travel the world and work and fulfill both those things together. But it's shifted into a lot of other, I think, more impactful projects and aspects of remote work and what it can do for the local economy. So I'm just eager for you to share a little bit about what your thoughts are on this and what you're seeing this kind of movement do for Gran Canaria, the Canary Islands, and just the world in general. If you could just sum all that up for me real quick, that would be great.
Well, it's going to be hard to summarize, but I'll do my best because there are so many things to talk about, right? But as a whole, so I can summarize what we're trying to do is in three aspects. So we're trying to drive talent to the Canary Islands. So that's why we are showcasing it and trying to bring people to the Canary Islands. We are trying to recuperate talent by, as I mentioned before, driving those Canary Islanders who have left to come back to the islands and continue their careers, whatever their companies are, but from the Canary Islands, so they can generate that impact locally. And we are also trying to retain talent. So we have very good schools, very good universities here. So the talent that it's coming out to the job market, we want them to understand that there are opportunities that they can reach from the Canary Islands without actually leaving. If the local market doesn't offer them what they want, they can access some opportunities remotely. So those three things are a big part of the socioeconomic impact that we're trying to drive in the Canary Islands. But also when we talk about sustainability, there's a big connection between remote work and sustainability, and one of them is connected to our main industry, so tourism. As I mentioned before, we used to receive 15 million visitors per year. That means visitors that came for a week for the traditional 1 week holiday. And we're trying to swift that into more of a long-term type of visitor where we don't need that much volume, but we need more sustainable type of visitor that connects better to the location, that travels slowly and generates more impact than traditional tourism industry. So I would summarize, those four factors, right? So sustainability and attraction, retention of talent.
Perfect. That's a great way to summarize a very broad topic. And I would love to do a whole episode just dedicated to that. But I thought it was important to at least touch on, because I think for a place like the Canary Islands, you said something earlier. I think you said brain suck or
brain drain.
Brain drain. Yeah, that was it. When you said brain drain, that really resonated with me, because you think about these places that are just have everything else, but they're lacking just a bit of industry. And then you see this fleeing of people, of young talent going to these hubs where they may not even really want to live. And I think it's really great to kind of see that moving in the other direction. And it's one of the main benefits of remote work. And so I'm happy to see it, on a personal level. I'm happy to see it positively impacting you and the community you care about. And then on a global scale, it can do so much for communities across the world.
Totally. Yeah. That's what we're working on. So hopefully more people will join and do their own thing in their hometowns too.
Yeah, I hope so. And you've kind of been liaisoning with some of the other organizations across the world I've seen that are doing this in their local communities, which I think is really cool to kind of see the powers combine there and help each other out in some different communities. So very cool.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this movement and this opportunity can be replicated in many other places. It's just a matter of showcasing the natural values of each place, because they are different, and trying to attract there, the people who connect and resonate better with those values.
Yeah, absolutely. Nacho, this has been super fun for me. A lot of interesting information. There's actually a lot more that I would love to have gotten into, but our time has flown by here, so we'll have to do it again another time. Thank you so much. I will definitely link to RePeople and all the information that we discussed. If there's any other places where people should follow you or your work or the work of RePeople other than the main websites and social handles, please let us know. Or if there's anything else you want to add, go for it. But again, thank you so much for joining, and I hope we can do it again.
Well, thank you, Chase, and also thank you for all the work that you're doing advocating for remote work, both at a personal level and also as the great work that you develop for the company that you're currently working on.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it, Nacho. I'm glad it brought us together. Hopefully, people will now know a good bit more about the Canary Islands, Gran Canaria, RePeople, and we'll continue to see the movement grow.
Thank you. We'll hope so.
Gracias, amigo. Talk soon. Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in today from wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm Chase, and this has been another episode of About Abroad. You can visit aboutabroad.com to get our latest updates and listen to past episodes, or find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, really anywhere you get your podcasts. On that note, if you enjoyed the show, feel free to subscribe, and if inclined, leave a few stars and a review. It's truly, truly appreciated and will help more wanderers just like you find us. Until the next time, adios from España.